All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to WiLSWorld Shorts. My name is Melissa McLymans, and before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to just start with a little bit of housekeeping. Lisa and Tasha will each present, and then there's going to be plenty of time for questions. And in fact, we hope that there's a really good conversation during the course of the afternoon. So feel free to ask questions as we go by typing them into chat, and Andy and I will keep an eye on those and make sure that Tasha and Lisa get to see them. Or at the end when we are doing Q&A, just feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, and we'll also try to help keep the conversation going throughout. But please note that this is being recorded, and if you could keep yourself muted unless you are talking, that will help a lot with keeping the noise down. Okay, so as I said, my name is Melissa McLymans, and I am a community liaison and outreach specialist at WILS. But before I came to WILS, I was a librarian at UW-Madison Libraries for almost 10 years, actually. And in my time at UW Digital Collections, I was part of the marketing committee, which is where I got to know Natasha Veeser, one of our presenters today. I left UW-DC 5 years ago, but I felt like I was still connected to UW-Madison. And that's because I was never removed from the library listserv. So when COVID-19 began to turn our worlds around, I noticed immediately that the UW-Madison libraries were instituting a really remarkable communication strategy aimed at offering as much clarity as possible for the staff with a large helping of empathy. And in fact, there were daily, and then as time progressed, weekly and maybe less and less updates from the Vice Provost. And there were toolkits created to help library staff communicate outwardly, trying to ensure a cohesive message despite the complexity of that message and rapidly changing conditions, and the fact that people were working far away from each other. So please allow me to introduce our presenters. First, we have Lisa Carter, who is the Vice Provost for Libraries and University Librarian at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In her role, she provides leadership for strategic planning, fundraising, coordinating campus library collections, services, and personnel. She advances cross-campus collaborations, cultivates campus, regional, national, and international partnerships. And we also have Natasha Veeser, the Director of Communications for Libraries at UW-Madison. She is responsible for the overall communications and marketing, planning, and implementation. In her role, she manages both the strategic internal and external communications, marketing and outreach efforts, and oversees branding, style, and messaging to ensure alignment with university standards and expectations. And just before I hand things over to Lisa, I do also want to just say thank you to Jessica Sayer, who is the administrative assistant to the Vice Provost, who really helped me arrange this short. She was wonderful to work with. So with that, I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen, and Lisa is going to start telling us a little bit about their experiences at UW-Madison.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So that was a very kind introduction, and I'm so glad that we had a very broad audience for some of our early listserv messages, and so I'm glad those went over well and sparked the idea that maybe we could share our experience. We're really looking forward to hearing from the folks on the call, other folks who have questions or experiences. So we're actually hoping to reserve quite a bit of time for questions and discussion. But for now, what I'd like to do is sort of set the stage. And if we can all just think back to mid-March of 2020, it's a long time ago, it feels like. There were certainly rumblings in January and February, that there was this thing called the coronavirus, and it was, lots of folks were starting to get worried about it and wondering if it was headed our way. But pretty much mid-March 2020, it became really clear, really fast. We knew we were in a crisis at that point, and the magnitude of that became clearer and clearer as the days went by and the questions piled up. And I guess that's the first thing I'd want to say is that looking back, you can sort of think about, well, on this day I knew. But as a leader, one of the things that's interesting to me as I look back is you're always thinking about what do I know, when did I know it, and how can I share it, and or how can I help people make sense of it. And I keep thinking back to that time, thinking, it kept feeling like there was something to track. It kept feeling like there was something that we needed more information on, but we didn't really have any concrete things to share until sort of the moment when everybody said, okay, we're in a crisis, don't come back to work tomorrow. So one of the things that you're thinking about is how to attend to both the immediacy of what's in front of you. So, telling the staff to go home, trying to figure out what the plan is for opening or not opening the libraries tomorrow, how all the patrons who are expecting to come in and study or get their books or whatever, how are we going to make sure they get the things they need? So you're balancing the immediacy of that with the context, right? So what's going on campus, needing to stay aligned with that. Staff's confused, like, what do you mean? Are you telling me to really not come into work tomorrow? How am I supposed to work? If I don't have a laptop, how am I supposed to clock in and get work done? And then also keeping track of evolving decision-making and mixed messages that you're getting. So as decision-making evolves, you get one message from one unit, you get one message from another unit, you ask questions, and you get, I got some messages, and then Natasha would get some messages, and then somebody else on a different group would get a different set of information, and we'd have to figure out how to make sense of all that. And I'm sure you're all thinking, well, yeah, I experienced something sort of like that last March. So there's this concern about the urgency of matters, but also the broader context. And I think it's really helpful to keep in mind that not everyone has the same experience. So as the Vice Provost for Libraries, I wasn't having the same experience that the Chancellor and the Provost were having. And I also wasn't having the same experience as the various staff members across the libraries. And it takes time to sort of sort through what's going on, what decisions can be made, what decisions need to be made elsewhere, and then also to communicate what the decisions were, if there were decisions, and even communicate when there's not decisions. I just like to remind everybody that it might feel like, as a leader, it might feel to you like there's too much, going on, it's happening too fast. You can't keep track, you don't know what decision's happening when. But to a staff person, it can feel like a really long period of time and a great deal of uncertainty. And it can feel like those are huge gaps in communication when actually there's not really much to communicate because everything's changing so much and so often. So we were constantly tracking our very specific concerns, again, like, where are we going to put the signs, and how are we going to deal with patron questions, and what kind of where can staff give feedback or send their questions, where can patrons provide their feedback and get answers to their questions, while balancing the big picture concerns. So, the Provost is in touch with me to say, how can students get laptops? How can staff get laptops? What about all of the materials that were on reserve for courses and things like that? So, so you're balancing both, like, something that's specific to the library opening or closing and what staff concerns are, while also balancing what university concerns are. So we pulled a response team together pretty quickly. Our Associate University Librarian for Public Services, Leslie Moyo, took the leadership of that, of our COVID response, and we thought very much about it as a crisis response at the beginning. And of course, we didn't know how long it was going to last. So we were thinking about, like, the immediate needs into the next week or two, but had no idea that it was going to last a year and possibly, longer. So, and at first we got everyone who was involved in public services and then potential partners together. And we ended up with like 30 or 40 people on that group, and we all met as often as we possibly could. And it soon became apparent that it was getting a little bit cumbersome and complex. And so we started to pull smaller groups together. So rapid response teams, effectively, to focus on specific things like a group to focus on facilities, a group to focus on the services, a group to focus on staffing, that sort of thing. And once you break up into smaller groups, then you have to start tracking what all those groups are deciding and making sure they're coordinating and then getting that information out to your team. So communication becomes a little bit more complex at that point, but it's really important that we keep an eye on all the things that are going on. And, while that's happening, so you got a bunch of small teams working, you got one big team working, you've got other folks in the organization who are starting to feel excluded because they're not on the teams and there's not much information to share. And things were still changing. And so people really felt like they didn't have all the information they needed to have when they wanted it. And so of course that adds to high levels of stress. So, so we took a lot of time, or it took us a lot of time actually, but then also we took the time we needed to figure out how to share about it as much as possible without sort of putting everyone into a panic. So we were very careful about how we worded those updates. So as Melissa was saying, we did for quite a while there, we were doing daily updates just to sort of say to everyone, okay, here's the situation today. Here's what we know. Here's what you need to know. And we spent a lot of time with each one of those updates trying to figure out what's the right tone to hit, what's the right amount of information to share, what's too detailed, what's not detailed enough, and how are we going to keep people from panicking, but also give them a good enough picture of the gravity of the situation. And then laid on top of that, we also kept in mind how to keep community. So like how to keep the libraries feeling connected, thinking like they're part of what's going on, but also making sure that we were careful about, just sort of the sense of a team. And then of course, because the listserv had a lot of folks on it who weren't library staff, we had that expanded team, and I needed to keep the University Libraries Committee, which is our shared faculty governance committee, informed, and the Friends informed. And so there were just a lot of folks to keep many layers of community sort of feeling good and like they were still connected. And then we not only just needed to keep that going in the libraries, but also other groups of libraries. And we were tapping into the other libraries on campus. So like the Library Coordinating Council, that includes the medical library, the law library, the education library, and then Wisconsin Historical Society, because they act as a library on our campus. And then I was also tracking and keeping pace with the Council of University of Wisconsin Libraries. So we had, all of us directors are on a listserv, and we were all wondering what's going on, and are you closing, and how are you keeping people safe, and how long do you have books in quarantine? And so there was a lot of exchanges on that listserv. And we created a spreadsheet, and we were entering like, here's what we know about our open status. We were doing that at the same time with the Big Ten academic libraries and with ARL libraries. And so at a certain point, there were like 3 different spreadsheets where we were trying to keep track of like, what are we doing? And then also going to those spreadsheets as resources to figure out like, so what is Iowa doing? What is, what's Milwaukee doing? What is Florida doing? So that we could just sort of stay in touch as a community. So the other thing that was really important is that we offered several feedback channels. So there was a COVID feedback channel set up, so people with specific questions for the COVID planning teams could drop in their questions. And that quite often helped us with identifying what kind of questions and information needed to be addressed, and what were people feeling on the ground. And then also I have an anonymous Vice Provost for Libraries form that people can fill out and send me feedback or send me questions. And that's another way where if people don't really want their name attached to a question, they can submit that information. We have a professional concerns committee. And actually I've forgotten now if it's them or the CASI that, but they maintain some feedback channels. And so they have a way of getting information in from staff and about how they're feeling, what they're concerned about. and they could surface that and get that to supervisors or to me or to the COVID response team. And then, as I expect most of you experienced, you're managing this crisis response, right? And it's ongoing, but there's other work that must continue. You know, books need to get checked out and returned. Patrons need to find a place to study or print or scan. You've got messages from committees you're on coming in, because not everybody's having the same experience during this situation. So some people are trying to get work done. The number of times I got just update emails like, here's what's going on from the Association of Research Libraries. I was like, I don't need more email in my inbox, please. I know that you're having like regular committee meetings, but I can't pay attention to that right now. So, and thinking about managing that for your staff as well, right? So we had a strategic planning initiative that was going on. We had all kinds of other normal work that just must continue. And making sure that staff was keeping pace with that while also getting the information about our crisis response was really important. And then, of course, as the time went on and we settled into this a little bit, you also need to be able to make sure you don't miss opportunities to communicate about long-term strategies. So as an example, the Big 10 Academic Association Libraries were trying to unveil our thinking about our big collection initiative, which is more attention to our interdependency and our network of libraries and what we can do together. And so you can't just ignore a big initiative like that for over a year. So you need to take time to communicate out like where are we with this thing that I was talking to you about in December of 2019, just to sort of keep people informed about these longer term strategies that might impact their work, might impact our investments and the ways we go about doing our work. But then also keep in mind that some things just need to be you need to let go of some things if it's just too overwhelming. And so Natasha and I and the team were always thinking about, is this too much information for the staff? Is this the right time to share this information? Do we need them to be focused on one thing? So maybe we hold this messaging for another time. And I'll just say and wrap up my comments by saying, and that really goes to the value of the team. So, we had a pretty, I feel like I had a nice big support team backing me up with those communications. So the different AULs might draft some communications. Natasha and then Jessica Sayer, who's my assistant, often helped with gathering information and starting drafts and actually sometimes writing full drafts, especially while we were managing several things at one time. And then sort of gathering the feedback from that team. What are you hearing on the ground? What's the university communications team talking about this week? What are the expedited planning group? What are they talking about this week? So gathering that information so that you can make sure that what you're communicating out represents the most information that you have at the moment. And then also have a sounding board. So there were several times when I wrote a message and I was like, wow, I don't know if I want to use those words, right? How are those going to come across to the average staff person? And so having people on my team that I could run a draft by or get further opinion on, is now the time? Should we phrase it this way? What additional information are people seeking? Is that too detailed? Keeping folks ready to help out with that messaging to make sure that what we were sending out was, as informative as it could be, but also not misleading or again, causing people undue anxiety. So just an awful lot of things to consider during a crisis such as this one. And as we just try to keep our work going, even on uncertain times and in weird times. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, Natasha, and see what kind of things you'd like to share with our audience.
Thanks, Lisa. So, second to everything that Lisa said, one of the things that I really think about when it comes to communication, especially when you're dealing with situations, you want to try to have a strategy. And this was a situation where you had to be comfortable with ambiguity. And that is something that is hard to do because the stress of feeling like you're always on the fly when you're trying so desperately to have a strategy is something that you have to come to grips with. And Lisa and I have talked about this a lot over the course of the last year, because when you're running, you're like, we just need a moment. We just need a moment. And recognizing you're not going to get that. So, and that's something that if we were feeling it just as, the team working with communications, then you can imagine the entire staff is feeling that in some capacity. So being very in tune and calling that out, and, some of the messaging saying, we don't know certain things. And I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do with communication, especially with this situation, is say, we are still waiting on answers. We understand that this answer is not going to be satisfactory, because I think you do more harm than good if you try to paper over it. So that's something that, huge kudos to Lisa for being the one to say, we are just going to say this is what we know. This is what we're going to say. And that really was a guiding light in terms of how we developed a lot of our strategies. So the other thing is kind of having a plan and knowing when to use it, how to use it, and when to adapt it. And actually the communications directors around the entirety of campus have been working with UCOM and PD for about a year prior to any of this happening to develop, there's a lot of EOPs, so emergency occupational plans or operational plans that you have for, your basic, your structures, your buildings, here's what happens, but all of them have little chunks of communication. There aren't actual communication plans. So the comms directors have been working really closely at the request of UCOM and PD to develop communication specific structures prior to this happening. And I think that really allowed all of us to move as quickly as possible when we started having to have the tough conversations, the early conversations, as Lisa mentioned, we're pulling people together in rapid fire pace. And then all of a sudden I can remember very distinctly after we're having, scheduled meetings with the response teams 1, 2, 3 times a day in person, all of a sudden we're like, this isn't a smart idea. We need to not be meeting in person given what it is that's causing this whole situation. So then all of a sudden you have everybody in, their own offices around Memorial or Steenbach. So it's having that ability to be flexible and navigate that, we don't always necessarily think we have, but we had to get to that point pretty quickly. And then just, like Lisa talked about, assessing the team that you need in place. And for me, I knew that we had the library staff in place. So then it was my job to make sure that I was keeping the connections with the campus lines that I needed to keep. And, many text messages and emails flying back and forth, like Lisa said, about, I heard this in university communications, the University Relations Council, is this tracking with what you're hearing? And there were discrepancies a lot of times. So being sure that we, had the ability to reach out very quickly and have the relationships with the people at the campus level to get us the answers that we needed. Bless John Lucas at University Communications, because he has heard from me way more than he will probably ever want to hear from me again. But it speaks to, quite frankly, the partnerships and the respect that we all have for each other, is understanding we're all under a lot of stress and getting the answers that people need as quickly as possible. I think some of the other things, keeping your clear lines of communication, like Lisa talked about, balancing the stress of not being able to release information. So one of the things that we ran up against more so as the summer went on, and I'll talk about why in a couple minutes, but when you have information and you can't release it yet because you cannot get ahead of campus, or your message is fine, or you need approval for it, and making sure that as you can imagine very early on, knowing which messaging needs to go through which channels. Early on, campus was very strict about all communications had to be approved through them if it were significant beyond just, okay, here's your daily update, we don't know anything else. And it's one of those where it's an added layer, it's a frustration, it's an extra, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 2 hours that happens. But when communication and details are changing so quickly, what we had to do was sometimes, even in the interim of having a longer stretch between approval, send another message out to staff saying, we know that the wait is hard. We are waiting. We are working on it. And finding that balance too of what's too much, what's not enough. And what we ended up doing early on, I worked with our web team, within, the really, really early days before the shutdowns, everything like that, to develop a COVID dashboard for just our staff. And Lisa's messages were scheduled. So she would, I think the first week or so while we were still on campus, we were sending AM and PM messages. And we would say, Lisa's AM message is up on the dashboard now, her PM message is up on the dashboard. Because not all of our staff, they don't receive messaging in the same way. Some people openly admit we don't touch email. And that's, the most frequent, in theory, easiest format to go, but some people, that's not how they receive it. And also with the volume that you're getting, you need to have another line. So having those dashboards, which then campus obviously created its own dashboard. So having the two align and having access to it made a huge difference in being able to make sure that we had the messaging out that we needed to have out. Just checking, make sure I didn't miss anything. Lisa covered a lot of great stuff, so that makes it very easy for me. And then also for specifically with, in my role, utilizing social media, because you're dealing with the university community, and social media is so different than, it was so long ago. It is truly a format of communication. So making sure that everything we had, whether it's on our news page, it's on our, library's COVID dashboard that we created, that everything is tracking and quickly going out via social media. And we had so many conversations with students and parents and other faculty members that actually happened within those channels. From the very start, when we were, shutting down, how do I get my books? I need a laptop because I don't have the technology that I need. And making sure to have extra support with my team, monitoring those so people are not waiting, having a response sometimes, instantaneously, 5-10 minutes at most. And then over the course of the summer, using those where we took several calls, parents that couldn't get through to campus on certain questions. So their next stop was the libraries. And we didn't have the answers on housing necessarily. I definitely didn't. But we knew who to go to. So we knew how to help them. And so it really was, the whole concept of the Ask a Librarian service, which we expanded greatly as this all happened because of this need, served a huge role in, again, are we here to really help you in the library world navigate that? Yes, but in this moment, we might not have the answers for all of your other questions, but we can find the resources, and we have the resources to get you those. So that was pretty significant. I'll actually pull up an infographic we have, I think March through November, of all of our, kind of online services and all the ways that we expanded. That it's pretty impressive to see. So yeah, as Lisa talked about, we did start daily communications, and then we've kind of gone back and forth. So we did that pretty strong all the way through, I would say, October. I mean, here and there kind of weaning, we'd scale it back. We don't want to push communication if it's not necessary, but it was more than, it's always important for people to be able to have a form of consistency. And this was a moment where it afforded us that opportunity. And I think that while, you get feedback, whether it's through, messaging that Lisa gets in her anonymous form that allows her to kind of see the themes that people are tracking with, what they're okay with, what are they concerned about, and she can share, the information she feels is appropriate with, the rest of communications and the AULs. And I kind of would bring in the COVID feedback response form that we had, and we were able to develop the themes. And from there, I think it went less into, there's still the notion of, we have very specific information coming down that we need to make sure campus or staff are hearing from campus. But then we shifted into, okay, let's take a moment to address the things we're hearing from you. And I think that was a really important shift because it was less about talking at staff and just pushing information on them to saying, we're hearing this concern or these set of concerns, and here's either how we know we can address it, we're working on addressing it, or we don't have an answer for you just yet. But it surfaced some areas that we might not have otherwise seen, which I think was really important. As hard as some of the communication feedback can be sometimes, I think allowing that to take place is critical for transparency, for trust, and just developing the best possible scenario you can for staff. And transparency is, one of those things that, especially in a situation like this, Lisa talked about, it's a tough balance because you want people to know what's going on and be comfortable and at least feel up to speed. And when you're not able to share that information necessarily, you have to make sure that you are ensuring staff that it's not because we're trying to keep you out. It's simply, there's decisions that have to happen, and we don't have the luxury of pulling in 200 people before those decisions are made. So that's been that's a struggle because nobody likes to feel like that. But I think allowing those avenues of feedback provided us the chance to sometimes individually go back and address folks. I found the COVID response feedback form that we developed to be excellent because names were attached, and every single day we had 3 of us that would triage it over the course of the week. And so it's your day, pop in, see what it is, see what the question is. And then you had direct contact. I think there was a lot that was alleviated using that method. And then when we moved into the reopening phases, the libraries never truly shut down. That was the interesting part. So you hear campus shut down, but we had ILL going, and when the Hathi Trust opened up the emergency access to things, that allowed for additional digitization, and then we had the laptop loans, and that was just to get us through like June, right? So then once, by April, May, we were starting to formulate, okay, what are the next layers? How can we open? And we are light years ahead of campus that was still in full shutdown mode. So we had to develop our pick up by appointment. And we went through, can't call it curbside, can't call it these other things. So we went through pick up by appointment, and it was, the low contact method that we could allow that would at least give people access to the materials that we could get out to them. And that service exploded. I can remember, I think one of the first days that we actually launched it, I had the chance to go into Memorial that day, and it's just the pictures of just book trucks after book truck with bags overflowing. So it's a service that was really important. And then after we got that launched, then we turned our focus to, okay, what's the next step? Allowing people back in the building in a safe manner. So we did that through library by appointment and we just started knowing that over summer session, your undergrad community is not going to be as intense. So we started with faculty and graduate students, and you have to have an appointment. And that's where we actually got into, we started with pickup by appointment, but then more wholesale with the library by appointment concept of really rebranding or creating a brand. And normally you don't want to go off and just randomly create brands, but we recognized this is going to stick around for a while. This is going to be the way that we are going to have to function. Definitely in the fall, potentially in the spring. We need something that is going to be attached to this way of doing things that's not going to be of question. So it's, it can't just be your logo. We actually had to come up with a whole new suite of things to manage that through our signage. And thank goodness we had just hired a graphic designer who started, I think, June 1st. And on June 1st, I was like, okay, by the end of today, I'm going to need a branding for this. So, and she's fabulous, and she pulled it all together, and then we tweaked it ever so slightly for spring. Again, still keeping with the same themes. So, that this is part of it, this is how we're functioning, but just tweaks enough where you're like, okay, this is spring information. I need to pay attention. And we'll do that again, for summer and fall, because I don't think we're going to go back to 100%, like we were a year ago. There's still going to be little steps that we're going to have to take. And one of the other things that we just are now starting to really be able to dive into is a survey that the graduate school sent out getting the data back from that. And some of it you can see was very early on in the pandemic. So it's, I don't want to call it irrelevant, but it's things that were addressed later on in terms of turnaround time for pickup by appointment and stuff. You know, I want access to a building. But then some of the other stuff that we're still working through and develop, not only addressing those issues and creating solutions for the concepts that we're seeing, but also developing more consistent communication. So before it used to be like, okay, if we've got something, we'll send it to the grad school if it's relevant. Now it's like, okay, we need to have a monthly thing. What is going to be the topic? What are we hearing from the graduate school? So that's now what we're going to be doing, is we have monthly submissions to their newsletters and their email outlets that provide students the updates that they need. We do that with the various faculty channels. We also do it with the undergrad channels. So it's become less of a as needed basis and more as a now trend pivoting into this is it's a consistent format, it's expected. And we've been fortunate to have great partners on campus that have been very open and receptive and actually appreciative of it, because that way they don't have to manage some of the answers that they don't necessarily have. So yeah, I think a lot of that, developing your feedback systems, you know, dealing with the public facing side and, you know, developing materials. There was a huge amount of materials that had to be developed because, like I said, we were opening up early. So campus was using us as a guinea pig for some of their broad health protocol signage that was going to be developed. But we were even further ahead of them, saying that's great that you need that for like the end of August, but we're opening up at this point in July. So having to get them to be okay with, we're developing our own signage for now, we're going to use it inside, we'll get your approval on certain things, which it ended up being a great partnership and a great relationship. And it allowed us to have access to campus materials a lot sooner than we would have. And it also allowed them to, quite frankly, test a lot of stuff out and see, oh, wow. I did a walkthrough with physical plant and university marketing through Memorial Library just to get the concept of what are you going to need every building. And so we did like 2 floors of Memorial Library, and their minds were just blown. It's like, yeah, it's complicated. So they went back to the drawing board after that and said, okay, well, we're going to need to adjust this, this, and this. So, you know, just being that campus partner, I think, has been really helpful throughout all of this. And again, like I said, it just created a relationship of trust at various levels that have allowed us to move forward on things. As hard as kind of being, you know, the trailblazer can be, sometimes it's very helpful in certain ways. But yeah, I think I'm guessing one of the best things I can do now is probably screen share some of the stuff that we actually did. Screen share scares me, honestly. So I'm going to try to do this, and I hope it doesn't break. And Melissa, I'm really sorry if it does. So let's see.
I don't think you're going to break anything.
Okay. You never know. Let's see.
And while she's working on that, should we check in? Are there lots of questions for us, or?
There aren't any questions right now in chat, but that's a great reminder that if there are some things, I know I have a whole list that I'm writing down. So be sure to be putting any questions you have in chat, letting us know what you'd like to hear more about, or if you want to share your own experiences.
Let's see. All right, well, our firewalls are apparently amazing. My computer's not going to play with me. I'm going to do this. I will put stuff in chat, make it easier. So one of the things that I think is probably the most daunting to look at times, but helpful. So we have our COVID-19 dashboard for staff. And this was where we really put the bulk of our information. And this thing has evolved so much over the course of the last year. It doesn't look anything like it did when we launched it in March, but you know, it gets us to where we need to be. We have, you know, our immediate staff information, then we have a lot of links to the different areas that we need. And then see, like I talked about the branding. So we have our libraries dashboard, but if you ever go to just the very homepage of our library website, you will see the first thing is library by appointment, and it's different colors than what UW would expect. It's one of those branding things where you don't always have to be exactly on the colors of your institution, but we went through a lot of different iterations of this and what was going to catch the eye. And so all of our materials, all of our signage around campus, everything was developed using this general theme, which again, it really allowed people to be like, oh, that's what I need to know. When I walk up to Steenbach Library, that's the signage type stuff that I'm looking for to say, I need to go in this way, or I can only go up to archives during this time, or here's my hand washing stations, or, here's the services that aren't available during this time. And actually campus was really great about requesting, or when we requested, they actually utilized this in the messaging that we were asking them to send out. They didn't bulk it at all, which was very helpful because it allowed people to get more eyeballs on it and continue to see, what we were trying to do.
And once you had the brand, Natasha, you were able to build out a toolkit,
Yep.
So that it wasn't all just Natasha pushing content out. She and the team created emails that the liaisons could send out, or different librarians could use. So there would be like a packet that would be similarly branded, and everything hung off that brand and hung off the messages, so that the language was consistent, and that if people were wondering how to say something, right? Natasha had already provided the wording, right? The images and the wording. So having that toolkit was really, really important.
Is the screen sharing actually working?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, well, then I will pop back really quick. So one of the things that we worked really closely with campus on was, this is the campus dashboard actually, and making sure that we had a library specific section on there, as a study space and our different operations. And that's competitive to get, this type of real estate on the campus site was not necessarily easy for everybody. Everybody wants that real estate, but we truly proved over the course of the spring and summer, the service that we were providing to campus, that it became a very prominent part of their website. And then just looking really quickly. So this is our homepage right now, and you can see that library by appointment. That is the branding that we went with. And we slightly tweaked it, like I said, for spring. We brought back more of the red, and we had the chance to, I guess the other thing too that we had to balance during this whole time is the serious versus the having fun. So our graphic designer, she created a graphic Bucky with a mask that had a library logo on it. The campus ended up requesting sans the library logo and instead with the campus logo. So it's just little things like that, knowing when to share that out, especially as campus went through its the Smart Restart, but mostly their Mask Up campaign. Smart Restart had to get retooled when we had to shut down 2 weeks into the fall semester. So campus had to very quickly change things around that, which is, it's expected, it's frustrating, but it's a global pandemic that you're not really planning for. Let's see, there's more of that. So the other things that you can see right there, the spring 2021, how we changed that. But this is our news and events page. And what we started doing was we just created another category, another tag. And it's something that we have to constantly be looking at how we're addressing these, but everything that was related to COVID and our operations and our operational status was put here. So this is where we sent people, and there's like 30 or 40 stories at this point. But this essentially is, when we kick stuff up to campus, because they can't afford to have a diatribe from us, we would give them a little snippet and said, please share this out in X, Y, and Z channel, and then just drive them to whichever link was going to be on this page. So we've been fortunate to retool our the news page over the course of the last year, so it looks completely different than it used to. And then, like I said, the social media, it's a huge part of everything. And with the exception of a couple weeks over winter recess where we had our holiday related card up, everything has been still library by appointment and driving to whichever URL we need them. We need folks to be able to get familiar with so that they understand how our operations are working. I probably still need to post today because my marketing person is on furlough. So, and then, so this is this is just one of our toolkits. I believe this is our fall one. So what we did, we created a reopening communications checklist, particularly in the fall, because that was the toughest, and we needed to determine what unit needed what. So I had folks fill out, when is your unit opening? What are you going to need? How many table signs are you going to need? I mean, it was thousands of different pieces of signage that we had to develop and print. So it took, fortunately we had staggered everybody, but even then we were bumping up right to the very edge on a lot of them because every unit really was very different in their needs. And then we have, reopening communications tool plans. And then the parts that really made a difference where Lisa talked about other people than sharing, because communication isn't one person, it's a practice that everybody needs to do. So we would develop, key links and resources, templates, and then key information or email and outreach templates. So this is where we would develop something that all of our staff would be able to plug and play with. So here's your language, here's all the information you're going to need, then you just plug in the stuff that you're going, the specific audiences that you're going to reach out to. And literally as soon as you would send out the notice of, okay, the toolkit's updated, immediately you would see like 15 people in this copying and pasting, pulling it down so that they could send it to the parts of the campus community that they worked with. So yeah, I think that was one of the most important parts. And then providing a social media, we developed tons of social media sample posts for folks. We had lots of graphics that went with them for people that might not be as comfortable or just don't want to have to sit there and spin over what's going to be the best thing for me to send out. Just be like, here, copy paste this into your feed, you're good to go. Developing that, and then providing PDFs for a lot of the generic signage, not your specific. If you've got your library that has these very specific hours, we'll develop that for you. But if you just need, one person per table sign, here you go, print it off. So all of that was in the toolkit. And every time we went through a shift in campus or a reopening status, new items were developed and put into the toolkit and then updated out to staff. And then we pulled all of the campus toolkit stuff, the various toolkits that they developed, and put them in there as well, so that people didn't have to go hunt around the campus site. It's down as well. And Lisa talked about our general communication messaging plan. So we started, you can see right off of that, this is just March, all of the messaging that needed to take place. And we went week by week. And we built it out. So, what we could build out more than, a few weeks, that was great. But a lot of times it was Thursday, Friday over the weekend where we're really saying, okay, what do we need to hit next week based on the information coming in? And this monstrous thing goes all the way through December of this year. And then we shifted it over to have a slightly different feel heading into this year, where there's still COVID related pieces every month, but also making sure that we took into account, like Lisa said, all of the other work that has to go on and not have it be just emergency or crisis focused, even though a lot of it really still is pretty heavy in that area. And then, this is basically just the spreadsheet that I keep with my own 2 other staff members. So making sure that we are tracking all that's going on, and that we're able to relay that to exec and to Lisa as they need to, and for them to be able to say, you need to plug this into your time frame. And then the one thing that we did do is we'd taken a pause on the library magazine last year, but we did relaunch it this year. And it was, we had planned this big ornate, it's going to be about the Kohler 50th, the Kohler Library's 50th anniversary. And they still had a huge section in there, but we had to address the reality of COVID and the social justice concerns and the unrest that were happening over the course of the summer. So as all of this was going on with reopening and figuring all of that, we still developed this because it was going to be an important benchmark in terms of being able to share with people everything that the libraries had been doing and that had happened. And the other, I guess the other fun part is we did develop, gosh, 6-7 different videos, you know, of we're still here for you, and here's the ways that you can use us, even though we're not in the libraries anymore. So that provided us an opportunity to have a little bit of fun in a time that otherwise was just so serious. You know, I think one of our librarians, she has a chicken that she dressed up with an Ask t-shirt, an Ask a Librarian t-shirt. So just providing some levity in a situation that otherwise there really hasn't been a lot. And then let's see, we worked very closely with like Center for First Year Experience to develop, this is what they're actually using right now. We'll tweak it a little bit as they head into summer, but this way all new and incoming students would be able to understand, here's what you can expect from your libraries. This goes out to every single new student that comes through campus. And then I believe we have, oh, if I can get to the infographic, let's see if it's gonna let me. Yep, so this is, I believe, our infographic from, I think this is the one that we retooled a little bit, but it just gives you a brief snapshot of, I think this is March through October of all, just a snapshot of the intensity of the numbers. Yeah, this is March through September, because that COVID libraries visit page number and the total requests is, those are a lot higher now. But this was something that actually campus glommed onto. They really liked, because it allowed a very easy, here's what's going on. And I know we sent this to you know, ARL and to some of the other organizations that, you know, we work with, BTAA, that allowed people to see, here's what the libraries are doing. So, you know, it's obviously so much more than checking out books. Here's really the nitty gritty numbers of just the demand for us and what we're doing. And that's something that we probably need to update again here soon. We didn't do it over December just because the lapse in students being gone for winter recess, but I think we'll kick it back up here probably pretty shortly. I'm going to stop sharing, see if it comes back. And I think that's kind of what I have for now. I apologize, that was really long.
It was wonderful. The tools are just fantastic. That infographic is beautiful. We did have a question come in, and I'm not sure which one of you can answer this, but did you need to acquire new software for the library by appointment? Did you have that in place already?
Yeah, that was all built through our request systems that are already in place. So our IT folks and the web teams just had to rework a few things. There was just mostly a lot of discussions on the back end about the wording that would go into a lot of the messaging. So, and just keeping up with, all right, who's actually accessible. You don't want to push out a site that's like, okay, yep, you can definitely book appointments for here. So making sure that everything was 150% lined up before you pushed it out the door. Oh, the infographic. Yes, I'm actually going to I'll put the link to the magazine, because the magazine actually has the most updated one, because we put the magazine out in November, I think. So it's in the magazine. There you go.
Perfect. So of the practices that you have adopted directly because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, what are you going to keep doing? Like, when we all have shots in the arm and we get to like go back, what did you learn in the last year that you're like, we should definitely do this going forward?
Do you want both Lisa and I to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. What did we learn? I think that I think just the need for, whether it's a weekly communication, we have a monthly staff newsletter, but having the purpose of a weekly communication, whether it's from Lisa, from an AUL, or from somebody else, and just knowing developing something that you know it's going to hit. So instead of just, hey, we've got this great news story, or we've got this great event, or so-and-so was on, Wisconsin Public Radio, where it's just kind of haphazard, where after the fact, that's great, we can pump that out. But really saying, okay, what do we want to hit? And the strategic plan is a lot to take on right now, but it actually is providing that perfect opportunity, to develop. We've got an excuse to have, whether it's a weekly or a monthly, or tying the two together, just keep things top of mind with folks. To me, that's probably been the most important piece, that we've always kind of had it sitting there, but forcing ourselves to use it and then getting staff used to it we have staff used to it. So I think we want to keep it moving there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. That was my answer too, was I think we're going to continue to do at least a weekly update. I think the other thing too that Natasha's gotten us really used to now is sort of a communication strategy sort of mindset, so that we're thinking ahead about what needs. So we're gonna have a strategic planning effort, or we're gonna have some budget reductions, or fall semester is going to happen, going to open up, and just using, being thoughtful about like, what can we communicate when and how soon, and knowing, also being responsive, so that if you know that there's something on staff's mind, being able to get out there and just say to them, we know you're thinking about this, here's what we know. We don't know a lot of the answers to your questions. We know uncertainty is uncomfortable, but we are paying attention, and we are trying to get the answers for you. So I think continuing with that sort of commitment to transparency, but also commitment to sort of thinking about communication strategy throughout everything we're working on is going to be really a really important way of working from now until forever, probably.
I think too, it's kind of, and speaking from like a communications person standpoint, it's like, you always want to know as much as you can, be involved as early as possible on things, because it's hard when, it's like, okay, now we bring in communications. It's like, really, this has been an experience where you're brought in from the get-go, and that helps, because you're not trying to play catch up, but you're also providing that base of the thought process of, we need to be thinking about this, 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 and this, if we're going to get to point B, C, D. So I think that's been, as hard as, this is for everybody to try to experience, there are little pieces that really, when you step back, you're like, this is going to be really helpful. So, yeah.
Great. I think we do have time for two more questions. If anyone wants to put it in chat or unmute yourself and say hi.
It's Friday and there's sunshine. Everybody's staring out the window. I don't blame them.
You also gave an incredibly complete presentation too, so there may have been lots of questions answered. I know I was writing down like questions, and I'm like, oh nope, they covered it. Happened many times. So had you ever gone through anything like this that you could draw on for experience? I
think so, in a couple capacities. Personally, I used to be a TV reporter, so the whole concept of deadlines and ambiguity is something I'm very comfortable with. So when people are like, oh my gosh, we got to figure this out, I'm like, oh, we're fine. We've got 5 minutes before deadline. We're fine. It'll be great. So that doesn't stress me out in any capacity. And I think the other thing that it didn't last a year. It lasted just a brief, awful 2 weeks. But when I was at the University of Kansas, working in the School of Journalism there, we had a professor who was ironically in public relations and strategic communications, who posted a blog about, I think it was the shooting at the Virginia Navy Yard. This was like 9 years ago. And he said something that it was just completely inappropriate. And we all of a sudden, I can remember I think it was a Friday afternoon. I'm like, why is our Facebook page blowing up on a Friday afternoon? What is happening? And long story short, it required intervention with the FBI. Our building was vandalized multiple times. There were death threats. We had to turn over email accounts to the FBI. And it was a weird situation in the sense that in that moment, the university actually was like, we're like, would you like to step in at some point and help us with this? And they're like, no, you're fine, you can handle it. So it was like a full week of that before they were finally like, well, maybe we should have, step in. But in that week, you'd think, granted, it was like the journalism, strategic communication, mass communication program. So there were the tools there, but when one of your own who's teaching that has essentially just completely annihilated every practice that you're used to. I think that's usually, Lisa's probably terrified now. That's my baseline for how bad I get. I'm like,
so this is one of those cases in which COVID was just not a big deal.
Yeah, it was more just like
way worse. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more just the mentality of, okay, this is a marathon. You gotta get comfortable with that. But in terms of how bad and how stressful can it get, I think being able to, you have to extract yourself and say, all right, take a breather.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really super, super valuable. So it's 2:00 and I want to just finish up with a comment that Jennifer left, because I think it's a really nice way to end this short. And it's not a question, but a comment to say how impressive it is that the library was a leader on the campus in terms of communication strategy. You should be really proud of that. And I think everyone on this call would agree with that lovely comment.
Oh, thank you.
And so with that, I will wrap this up and just offer our heartfelt thanks to both Lisa and Tasha, and hello, for your time today. We really appreciated learning from you. And we will wish you all a very happy weekend.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Melissa.